So let's talk about differences between Sony and Canon cameras. Just a really quick recap of my story so far going from Canon to Sony. I started off as a Canon shooter when I finally took photography seriously. I shot on my Canon R, and I mainly used my 85 1.4, my 24 1.4, and my 16 to 35 f4. So I was pretty invested in Canon, but when it came time to upgrade cameras, there really just weren't any Canon cameras that I wanted to spend money on. The R5 and the R6, I used them and they were really nice, but I did not trust them. I shoot photo and video, so as a hybrid camera, I just couldn't trust them. They're really good photo cameras, but I just needed something that could be reliable for both things. And C70 came out and I really liked it, but there were just a lot of things that I had to work around for that. The size being the main thing, and the smaller sensor size. And of course, I had to consider the Sony A7S III. It just, it checked all the boxes except for the fact that it was a Sony camera. That was something that was really difficult to get over. But then I had the opportunity to purchase this camera new for $2,200, and that was enough for me to jump ship and just try out Sony. I still plan on keeping all my Canon lenses, especially once I can adapt them to this camera and my Canon R body. But once it's time for me to upgrade to a new camera or just get a second body or a third body, it'll probably be a Sony camera, be it an FX3 or an A1 or an A7 IV whenever that comes out. I think I'm just getting more and more used to using Sony. But having said that, there are a few things that I had to get used to when going from Canon to Sony. Here are a few of them in case you're thinking of doing the same thing. So first off, the grip. You basically have to hold the camera at an angle instead of straight on like with Canon. And to be honest, even though the grip is smaller, I now find it to be way more comfortable on the Sony, but I do wish it was a little bit bigger. The camera is really sharp. By that I mean like the top edges are just very, like the corners are very sharp, and the anchors where you put in the straps are the worst. I don't understand why they did that. They just kind of like stick out. On the R, it's kind of part of the body, and on the FX3, it's also just part of the body. So I don't know why they have these silver ears on the camera. It just doesn't make any sense, and it's kind of uncomfortable because you can kind of hit it with your hand when you're holding the camera by the grip. And you can also not lay the camera down on its side very comfortably. And they just stick out. I mean, literally stick out, and they're a different color. I don't know why they did that. I know Sony has improved the flaps for the ports. I just don't understand why the HDMI flap opens like this and it just has this really long flap sticking out. It could just open like a door. I feel like that's just going to get in the way, and people are just going to eventually rip it off because it just sticks out too much. I really like the mode dial on the top. I much prefer a dial over what the Canon had, which had the mode button. Even though I got really quick with that and I could just kind of switch between photo and video without thinking about it. But the mode dial on the Sony has this button you have to be pressing in order to rotate the dial, which is really annoying. I wish it was like the exposure compensation lock where you hit it once to unlock, hit it one more time to lock it back up. However, I do really enjoy how much you can customize all the buttons on the Sony body. You can just kind of make it your own. I pretty much just mirrored the stuff that I already had with Canon and just made a few more improvements here and there. I think Sony's just have, like all the settings, you can really go deep dive into it. And the settings menu isn't that bad. I've heard people say that's improved a lot from the previous iterations, but it's still not that great. I have no issue. I know where everything is now. I've only had it for about 2 months, and everything, it just makes sense. Just vertical instead of horizontal like on Canon, so it's a little bit getting used to, but it's super easy. Besides the strap anchors, the one thing I can really say I hate about this camera is the screen. It's just small, it's pretty low resolution, it's dull. At first I thought it was S-Log3 that was making things look really gross, even with the Rec 709 LUT. But I plugged it into a monitor, and even with the Rec 709 LUT, the same exact LUT, it looked 10 times better. It's just sharper, and you can actually see like a little bit of contrast, which again, I know the log profile is supposed to make it super flat, but it's almost deceptive. It's really, I'm finding it really hard to expose properly for S-Log3 just from the back screen. If these Sony cameras had screens like Canon cameras, it would be a huge improvement. That's something I think the FX3 could have done a lot better. If you're gonna call it a cinema camera, don't just take an A7S III, take off the EVF and add a fan. They could have made it a little bit taller, just a little bit bigger, just to add a very much usable screen. Right now, it's basically the exact same screen you find on the A7S III, which is kind of a wasted opportunity. And the SD cards are not facing you. So if you're loading and unloading, you can't really see which card you have. You can just see like the back pins of the SD card. It's a little weird, but not a big deal. I think that's it for the camera body. I do love the camera. I think the most important thing for me is that I had a flip screen just because I'm used to it with Canon R. And the buttons are great. The shutter feels good. The buttons just feel like high quality. They don't feel cheap. Now on to the lenses. The lens I started out with was the 24-105 f4. That's just because I wanted to have one lens that did it all. And the f4 didn't really scare me. I had the 16-35 f4 and it was fine. But with this camera's high ISO performance, I was okay with it. And it had IS, or OSS, Sony calls it. So lens is really nice. It's pretty rugged. It has, you know, autofocus, manual focus, and OSS buttons. And it has a multifunction button right there. Don't use it much, but I just like having it. The rings, the zoom ring is a little bit stiff, which is fine. But my biggest issue is that it runs opposite to the focus ring. So what I mean by that, to focus further, you go this way, and to zoom in further, you go this way. So it's going, so the zoom ring goes to the right to go further, but then the focus ring goes to the left to go further. So that's a little frustrating. I don't know why. Thankfully, the focus ring goes the same way as my Canon lenses. Also, the focusing on both of these lenses is, the lens is really smooth, but it's focused by wire. And this is my first experience with focus by wire, and I do not like it. The Canons, they have, you know, semi-hard stops, so you can actually know which end you are, and they have this little window that tells you which direction you're going. That's basically how I learned how to manual focus, with those little windows, and these just don't have anything. So autofocus on this camera is extremely quick, as I'm sure you've seen already on this video. Autofocus is really, really good. It's way better than on my R, which did have autofocus, just not this responsive. I don't know. I think it's pretty quick. I don't have to say ISO performance on this camera is insane. This really isn't a review on this camera or the specs. This is more my experience with the outside parts, the outside factors. Overall, I'm extremely happy. That's why I'm considering buying another Sony camera, but just some things I wanted to warn people about. If they're planning on making the switch as well. I know going from Canon to Sony is pretty cliche, and I'm one of many that have done it, and many more that will continue to do it in the future. I hope Canon puts out new and exciting cameras. I know the R3 is coming out. There's a rumored R5C as well, which of course makes me think like, oh man, maybe that'll be me going back to Canon, but I don't know. I don't think I want to think that far ahead in the future. I don't want to hold out for something that may or may not happen. So right now, I'm extremely happy using Sony A7S III for video and my Canon R for photo mostly. I don't mind the lower megapixel count. I think that's plenty, to be honest. And it's way quicker to upload to Lightroom and download. And my computer, which is not an M1 Mac, it's just good old Intel, struggles enough as it is. So I don't need 45 megapixels. My 30 megapixels on my Canon is just almost too much. I hope this was useful to someone. I know there's a lot of questions and there's a lot of fear and doubt when you're switching systems because it's a lot of money. We're invested plenty into these things. And you know, it's our livelihood too, so you want to make sure you're not making a mistake by spending all this money and then having to regret it or something. So maybe I'll make a video in the future going about like the details, the comparisons between Canon and Sony. There's plenty of videos out there, but there are definitely some things that I noticed that impacted me more personally. So I might make one of those, but just there's so much to unpack with the differences between the camera bodies and the lenses that I just thought it was pretty important. But that's it for this video, and I'll catch you in the next one. I I didn't cover the whole. Ooh.